Hey now, welcome to another edition of Refreshing Thoughts. I am your host, Chris Fresh, and this is a YouTube show, podcast. I'm not sure what it is, but it's my thoughts on anything from geek to pop culture to love life, whatever. I don't want to steal my other podcast tagline. I am Chris Fresh. You can follow Refreshing Thoughts Pod on social media. There it is. I don't know if I left the banner up long. That's at Refreshing Thoughts Pod. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And if you have the means, we have a Patreon. Patreon.com/C// Refreshing Thoughts Podcast / membership, where for $5 Australian a month, you can subscribe to the show and keep the lights on, and we would greatly appreciate it. But I wanted to jump into something. I've been off for a couple of weeks traveling over to the United States, and there's a lot to talk about that trip. But that's actually not what's prompted me to record right now. I will get to that, and we'll get to that on Geek Dudes, etc., etc. What I wanted to talk about was there were a couple of big passings while I was away in America. The legendary Ozzy Osbourne passed away, which was incredibly sad. But as I've talked about on Refreshing Thoughts, I have been a lifelong professional wrestling fan. I work in professional wrestling and have done so for 26 years now, as a performer and behind the scenes. And late last week, Hulk Hogan passed away. And it would be remiss of me not to talk about Hulk Hogan, because I don't think any of us of my generation — I was born in 1979, I'm at the tail end of Gen X, I'm a Xennial, a micro generation if you look into that, but I'm a child of the 80s and a teen of the 90s. I don't think any of us are captured by the magic of professional wrestling if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan and the World Wrestling Federation. Yes, yes, it's for WWF. And you know, his passing has brought up a lot of memories, and I also want to talk about some conflicting thoughts and feelings about the legacy of Terry Gene Bollea, the man behind Hulk Hogan. And I think both can coexist. But first, I want to talk about the fun of wrestling and Hulk Hogan. You know, I like talking about toys. And to me, when I think of wrestling figures and iconic wrestling figures, there's perhaps none more iconic than the LJN Series 1 Hulk Hogan. Like, look at it. It is a thing of beauty. Um, I have a pretty nice condition one, as you can see. Um, no child my age wanted to go without having Hulk Hogan in the collection. He was the World Wrestling Federation Superman. He was like Randy Savage was probably the Batman. If I was going to use a DC analogy, he was the Captain America. He was the hero. He was the front man. He was the crossover star. Now, it was not Hulk Hogan that sucked me in completely into wrestling and made me fall in love with it. That would be the Ultimate Warrior, who I always describe, and Hogan sort of feels into this, but Warrior maybe more so, of like an 80s cartoon come to life with the neon face paint and the tassels and the bright colors and the loud dun 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 dun, and charging down to the ring. That's who captivated me. And but there was no denying the star power and the allure and the great storytelling that Hulk Hogan, the professional wrestling character, was a part of. And, my first memories of wrestling being on my radar was childhood discussion in the play yard of King Kong Bundy versus Hulk Hogan in the steel cage. And that Hogan's ribs were hurt and he had to wear bandages and stuff. And I was hearing other kids talk about it. And I had seen bits of professional wrestling because you couldn't avoid it in the 80s. And I wanted to seem cool and with it with the conversation played along like I knew exactly what was being talked about. But Bundy versus Hogan was a big deal in the schoolyard and a terrible deal for the chubby kid in school because when kids wanted to play professional wrestling, they turned to me to be Bundy. Now it's funny because I'm a bald-headed man. I'm not quite as chubby as I once was. But Hogan and Bundy was ginormous, and then of course Hogan and Andre is legendary, as my good friend Julian James, whose band The Shine, do the intro music for Refreshing Thoughts with Heads Are Gonna Roll. You can find them at The Shine worldwide. But he talks about the ridiculousness of how many people were in the Pontiac Silverdome and how much Andre weighed and all legend and stuff. And I'm going to get into that side of wrestling and Hogan a bit later. But like larger than life. But the thing that really drew me in, I've talked about it on this and many stories. It's famous. It's tied in to my Uncle Max. My mum passed away in February 1988, February 29th, actually, leap year, shortly after my ninth birthday. And I went to live with my Uncle Max for a bit as all the logistics of mum's passing was being taken care of. And I would do so multiple times throughout that year. And one of my fondest memories from that period of time is sitting with Uncle Max and watching the WrestleMania 4 tournament for the WWF title. Unfortunate venue in hindsight. But the allure of watching this title tournament because there were shenanigans between Hogan and Andre got the pin, and there were twin refs, and Million Dollar Man purchased the belt, and it's been held up, and it's in a tournament because you can't buy a championship. So that means Andre was a World Wrestling Federation champion. He just got stripped of the title for trying to sell it. He'd probably be, held in high regard these days for such a thing. But anyway, this tournament captured my imagination. Randy Savage goes on to win it, and thus the Mega Powers are born shortly thereafter. And, Hogan was just always this constant. It was just, it was just a fact that Hogan was always going to be there and always going to be the man. And anytime he wasn't the man, it caused a feeling of shock and disbelief, even if he wasn't your favorite wrestler. Plenty of people I know, Hogan wasn't their favorite, but, undeniable top star that you were drawn into. I remember as a kid, and I know people sort of knock it now, but I remember hiring a super tape on Coliseum Home Video and hang on to your seats. I watch those videos way too much. The Honky Heroes of the World Wrestling Federation. They say honky heroes, don't they? Not hunky heroes. That'd be weird if they say hunky, but they say honky, but there is a honky. It's Wayne Ferris. But anyway, the Hogan Bossman cage match where Hogan superplexes off the top of the cage, the big boss man and stuff. That stuff was amazing. The Randy Hogan feud. I think that was one of the times I sort of think I was on Macho Man's side a little bit with the feud against Hogan. And then, the biggest match, and I can still go back and watch this match and love it. I rate this match highly. I don't care what anybody says. But the biggest match to me, Hogan versus Warrior, title for title at the Sky Dome in 1990 at WrestleMania 6. That match culturally meant so much to me as a kid that my hero was taking on the hero. you know, and there could only be one, and these two giant baby faces going at it. Like I remember at the Rumble when they were going at it. And I spoiled myself because I couldn't handle it. I remember dad had a VCR and TV in his room separately because his mum passed away and we got left a spare TV and VCR. And I watched WrestleMania 6 in there and I had to fast forward to the end because I was so excited and couldn't handle the tension of what was going to happen. I had to see what happened and then watch the match. Sort of like going to watch Superman. I I enjoyed it far more the second time because I was relaxed that it was a good movie, and I could enjoy it. I'm a weird person. And Hogan, you know, passing the torch, and then in hindsight, realizing he smartly stole the Warriors' spotlight by impromptu giving him the belt. And then so the camera would focus on Hogan leaving rather than the Warriors moment in ring and stuff. Classic Hulk Hogan politics. But that's the game, isn't it? I'm kind of charmed by it these days. And you know, Hogan coming back and defeating the Iraqi Sergeant Slaughter. And, that's when wrestling, you start to realize the shine was starting to be lost. But for me, I only started to love wrestling more. But, my tastes and my palette expanded where rather than the big superheroes, it was the pink and black and the cool shades and the leather jacket of the Hitman Bret Hart and his incredible wrestling skills and coolness that, as I became a teenager, he became my favorite wrestler, and you couldn't be any more opposite of Hulk Hogan than Bret Hart. Same as opposite of the Ultimate Warrior. But I remember like the Survivor Series team of Hogan, Jake the Snake, and Demolition, just like an incredible team of star power. And we can look back through today's lenses and look at how flawed all these people are, were, or became, and all of that. But I always try and just unplug from that and connect in with the child passion of how I felt. Because if we view everything from childhood with the prism of cynicism of today, then it's all trash and garbage for the most part, isn't it? Like, so many of our heroes don't hold up long term. So many moments and everything, they've all got a darkness or a sinister side to them. Like you can't even watch Shirley Temple movies. I know it's an old reference. I've just been walking the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But you can't go back and watch Shirley Temple and think of, well, she was manipulated as a child and blah blah blah. Like yes, we find out this stuff later, and it puts a different level of interest. But I do kind of go. Sometimes it's okay to stay plugged into fond childhood memories. And, Hulk Hogan was a big part of that. And I remember Hogan almost led my rebellion against the establishment. Like in 1992, when in the what I consider the greatest Royal Rumble of all time, where Hogan throws out when Sid throws out Hogan fair and square, and then Hogan pulls Sid out and helps Flair win. I was like, fuck Hulk Hogan, this is bullshit. Sid threw him out. And you heard the crowd start to turn on him and stuff. But then, you get to WrestleMania 8, and I watched WrestleMania 8 so many times. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I love Mania 8. Brett versus Roddy is a classic. Savage versus Flair, Hogan and Sid, the Warrior return. I stand by WrestleMania 8. But, the idea that, was this the end of Hulkamania? I wasn't aware of all the steroid stuff at the time, and that I just took wrestling and the stories they were telling me at face value, same as movies, same as television, same as that. Like we all try acting like we're cooler than what we came from, me included at times. I'm not saying I, I'm not casting stones in my glass house, but I choose to go back and be nostalgic about professional wrestling and not forcibly hold my nose, but just understand it was what it was at its time. And at that time when I was young, I put myself back in the shoes of when I was young, and I enjoyed as that. Now, it can get complicated, which I'm going to get to, but I'm going to keep talking about Hogan because, I've heard two extremes. Everybody needs to black out all the other, so block out all the other stuff. Funny I said black out, block out all the other stuff, and ignore all of that. He was an icon. And then you have people on the other thing going, I don't care that he was an icon. What about all the other stuff? And I sort of land in the why not both category. And judge me for what you will because of that. But everything has a complicated legacy, doesn't it? Now, I'm a big Guns N' Roses fan. As you can tell, I got my new Guns N' Roses cap, a lids exclusive over in America. Fancy, I really like it. I don't know if it suits my head, but I don't know. I like it. Anyway, Guns N' Roses, my favorite band of all time. Terrified to meet Axl Rose because if he was rude to me, I don't know. I don't want a bad experience, but let's just cut it to the music. It can be misogynistic. One in a Million's a incredibly complex and racist Guns N' Roses song. Um, you can go, well, because of this and because of I know that that's wrong and all of this, I can no longer enjoy any of their stuff. And there are some people where it goes so far that I go, I just can't take it. And if you told me you don't like Guns N' Roses because of the misogyny or because of One in a Million or because of that, fair enough. There's a zillion other artists. You can go listen to The Shine worldwide. Go find them on music services and enjoy their music. There's lots of other music. I can understand that. If you choose to not be able to stomach Hulk Hogan because of everything that came out, that's fair enough. I don't like Terry Bollea. He was a terrible racist, a right-winged phony, but so many in professional wrestling are phonies. We're all phonies. All of us. The Ultimate Warrior, my all-time favorite wrestler when I was a little kid, was a homophobic bigot. Jim Hellwig, you hear all the stories, was not a great man. But the Ultimate Warrior, the character and the visuals and everything, the Ultimate Warrior meant so much to me. It's like in Australia, so many people like to rag on Hey Hey It's Saturday. I do a podcast about it called at Hey Hey Podcast on Instagram and Facebook.com/Hey Hey It's a Podcast. If you want to, it was a big variety show here in Australia, and so many comedians, musicians, and everything talk about how they're above and better than Hey Hey It's Saturday, without ever once acknowledging that it was the destination at 6:30 on a Saturday night in Australia for like 20 something years, and Daryl Summers was iconic and all the big stars went on there and everybody watched it. But everybody wants to act like they're too cool for it. That old Aussie tall poppy syndrome. Um, I I'll keep going. So Hogan, at WrestleMania 9, he doesn't want to drop the belt to Bret Hart around this time. He beats Yokozuna in seconds. He then doesn't defend the belt. He goes to New Japan Pro Wrestling, and this is when I start becoming a real mark, because I'm buying the magazines and stuff. And Hogan is in New Japan, and he calls the WWF title compared to the New Japan title a toy and stuff. And I'm starting to go, fuck Hogan. He was easy to rally against because he was the man. But because he was the man, he was the face of everything I love. I detest Vince McMahon, wretched human being. But I refuse to let him take away something that made me me, because it wasn't just him. that created that. So many people helped create the World Wrestling Federation. It's like I don't let Gary Goddard take away the Masters of the Universe movie from me, as flawed as it is. But I've got such nostalgia for it. You know, Elvis Presley, Priscilla, age gap, Michael Jackson. They still play his music on the radio. Damn it, his music's iconic. Never found guilty. That's another episode to do with Julian James. You know, so many people in Hollywood, in music, in wrestling were incredibly flawed, right? Negatively flawed. But uh, I think it should be the individual decision on whether you let them take away something you enjoy because of their flaws. You know, like, do you never watch something with Kevin Spacey again? Do you never take in a Harvey Weinstein movie because Weinstein was involved with a lot of movies? Or what about all the crew and set people and the other actors and actresses and stuff that worked on the movie? Do we take away their work because of this individual? And that's sort of where I land with Vince McMahon or Terry Bollea. You know, do you let Terry Bollea take away Hulk Hogan? Are they one and the same? Do you let Jim Hellwig take away the Ultimate Warrior? Like Jake the Snake Roberts, Terror, do you let him, he's probably closer, like, to separate, I don't know. I, I don't know how to answer that. And I don't think I can answer that for you. It's a personal decision, you know, but I don't know that you should get mad if people choose not to. I guess probably the line where I draw on the sand for me personally, with Benoit, and I considered Chris Benoit perhaps one of the greatest professional wrestlers that ever lived. I loved Benoit in WCW. I loved him in WWF and stuff, but he killed a woman and child. Now, do I believe concussions and painkillers and everything caused Chris Benoit to snap and do this? Yes. Do I think inherently Chris Benoit was always a bad person? No. But can I forgive and tolerate what Chris Benoit did? No. For me, that's a line, you know. So many people go, oh, he killed Nancy, but how could he kill Daniel? I was like, no, no, no. He's a murderer. It was a terrible thing. But Owen Hart died, and wrestling just moved on. I continued to watch wrestling and stuff. I'm on with it, but without the moral high ground of the show should have stopped. And it should have and stuff. Does that mean that I should have turned off pro wrestling? Maybe. Maybe a better person did at that point and moved on. Do I think Phil Mushnick was right about a lot of the stuff he said about professional wrestling? Yes. But I I just I don't think any of us should take away or give a pass to anyone else. It's a individual decision, you know. So Hogan, to get back on track a little bit, Hogan jumps to WCW, and I was desperate for more wrestling. And WCW Worldwide was starting to be shown on Channel 9 here at 12 o'clock on a lunchtime. I remember a girl I found cute in high school um, wanted to sort of, I guess she was just talking to me because I was a funny guy in class because I was ugly and fat. So I better have had a good personality. And I'm not sure I had a good personality. I was, if nothing else, funny. I was mean too because, got to get them before they get me. That's a whole discussion about my youth that I'll get into later. But anyway, Stav, short for Stavrola, Stav was talking to me, and she was watching wrestling because she saw WCW, and she was talking to me about it. And I remember being so embarrassed because her takeaway was she really liked the Cole twins, who were just two good-looking, handsome, unpainted Sting-looking dudes, a tag team. They never amounted to anything and stuff. And it was like, oh, that's what you took away from it. Not Vader. But Hogan went to WCW, and it was like, oh, this alternative is getting some names. You know, Randy Savage, Jim Duggan, like all these people went in there. And I can understand now WCW fans going, all these terrible wrestlers came over and stunk up the ring. But what it did do was it lifted WCW at a time when wrestling was flat. And I remember I was watching it, and I sort of was charmed by the Dungeon of Doom versus Hulk Hogan feud, not because it was good, because it was bad, and there was something fun trying to see them recreate something that would have worked in 86 and it terribly bomb in 94 and 95. And, Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster, and, all of this stuff. I sort of thought it was funny. But, Hogan and Savage did come across as these. Savage was always cooler than Hulk. But they were coming across as these old fuddy duddies, and wrestling was sort of evolving. ECW's rising, WWF's got the new generation, and they're carrying on and all of this stuff. But Nitro started, and wrestling started looking. And I don't think Nitro starts unless Hulk Hogan goes to WCW. Hogan brought a lot of celebrity and credibility with him because he was the one that crossed over. And make no doubt about it, he, to me, is the biggest professional wrestling star. And I actually heard Brian Alvarez echo my statement, not because he heard it from me, but he agreed. The Rock crossed over into Hollywood. Huge star. Austin, for a brief period of time, megastar. But Hulk Hogan, like, you could paint all the megastars of the 80s, including Elf, Michael Jackson, Dolly Parton, Arnold Schwarzenegger, but Sly Stallone, Hulk Hogan absolutely holds his place as a crossover megastar. He is the biggest professional wrestling star of all time. That's my opinion. To me, he is. Because The Rock became a big Hollywood star. He was never the biggest wrestling star. To me, The Rock was always just behind Stone Cold. I don't take anything away from The Rock. Incredibly charismatic and talented dude. Don't get me wrong. But to me, Austin was the man of the Attitude Era. There were a lot of one Bs, but Austin was 1A. Hogan, daylight, everyone else. And it's hard to sort of, I guess it would be hard for my children to understand just how culturally significant he was. So anyway, Fox Sports here started, and Foxtel started showing WCW pay-per-views live. And I took a day off school and I watched 2 pay-per-views live in a row. The first one was the Great American Bash 96. And better pay-per-view than Bash at the Beach 96. Go back and watch it. It's a really cool show. But Scott Hall and Kevin Nash continuing this intriguing storyline of these invaders from WWF coming over. They come out and there's talk of a third man, and they attack Eric Bischoff, and it's not really promoted publicly that he's the boss, and they drive him to a table. And I remember that moment going, oh my God, how cool is this? And then at Bash at the Beach, I was with my high school friends, Laurie and Chizzy, Luke Chislett. We were watching Bash at the Beach 96. And Hogan comes out at the end of Randy Savage, Lex Luger, and Sting versus the Outsiders, Hall and Nash. The third man hasn't revealed himself. Hogan comes out. I don't know what's about to happen. And he comes out and he turns and drops the leg on Savage. Always thought it would have been cool if he dropped it on Sting because Sting was WCW. Drops it on Savage and he turns, And I guess dropping it on Savage makes you go, well, Savage isn't a part of them. And it was just this huge deal. And I can't put into words how exciting the NWO was. I hear a lot of people, talk about the NWO. Everybody wears the shirts. Some people say it was lame. My friend Boost, he's not nostalgic for it at all. He's very pro WWF, doesn't want to borrow WCW and stuff. For me, the NWO was the coolest. I remember spending $50 Australian, which was like $1,000,000 to a 18-year-old, or just turned 18, to go to Laz, who ran Pile Driver magazine and the wrestling hotline, 0055 know it off by heart. He was getting in shirts, and I had an NWO shirt, and you couldn't get them around anywhere. They hadn't hit What's New or any of the stores here in Australia yet. People were stopping me on the street about the shirt. The NWO was huge, and we all loved Hall and Nash. They were the cool ones, and Six when he joined, and Trillionaire Ted, and the cast of Millions, which would eventually join. But it was Hogan, and the fact that this icon had turned black and white from yellow and red, that's what kicked this thing off. So many of these LJN Hulk Hogan's got customized with beards painted on them around the mustache and long trunks with lightning and stuff. I think I even got one of my friends to do that to a beta Hogan I had lying around. So many of them got turned into NWO Hollywood Hulk Hogan's for lack of availability of toys, because it would take time for Toy Biz to get the first Hollywood Hulk Hogan, or actually it was original San Francisco toy makers that did the first one. But then he's tagging with Rodman, and when Rodman was hot and stuff, like there was a period in time where Hogan was as big as ever. And this was, 12 years after the birth of Hulkamania. That's incredible stay power when you think the Attitude Era kicks off in 98. So The Rise of Austin sort of is really 97. And it's sort of done by 2001, and the build up to Hogan versus Sting, it was huge. Like it felt like every European in Australia loved Kiss and the NWO. It was just incredible. And Hogan was such a big part of that. And you could never say Hogan doesn't get enough credit. But I think it's hard for me to separate everything I love about professional wrestling, because Terry Jean Bollea was a terrible human being. Somebody I was starstruck when I met him. I remember saying, "God bless you, Hulk," because I knew he'd get a kick out of it. But he would. The problem with Hogan is he became a parody of himself eventually, and didn't know when to quit. And I remember his brief babyface run in '99, where the yellow and red came back and stuff. It was no good. And then I used to call him Funbar Hulk, FU New Blood. He had on the back of his vest. That Hogan sort of sucked. And then, he thought it was done. And then the NWO came into the WWF, and they were never going to put them over. But he had that match with The Rock. And you've got to go back and see it. The crowd reaction to that match, and the masterfulness, the art that Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea as Hulk Hogan, the art of him manipulating that crowd, manipulating Dwayne Johnson, outworking everybody and putting on a masterclass. It was the final show of one of the great professional wrestlers. Now, there's many ways to view a professional wrestler. Hulk Hogan was never going to give you 5 stars, but he'd give you the most entertaining 3 stars in part of a show that you could get that would make it as big as 5 stars, right? Nobody loves the art form of professional wrestling more than me, but there's more to just in-ring. There are promos, there's appearance, there's presence. They all are a part of why we love it, right? There are some people that only want to focus on the in-ring skills. I remember I was taking an inducting class. I was one of the early trainers at the MCW Academy, the Melbourne City Wrestling Academy, when that started and opened, along with Jay Andrews and Mikey J. We opened a training school. And I remember I was working with this kid, and he was a nervous Nelly, and he told me he didn't have to talk or have charisma in wrestling, and he only cared about Misawa. Now, I'm a big Misawa fan. I love Japanese professional wrestling. All right, love it. But the dressing down I gave that young man about the art form of professional wrestling that he thought he was lecturing me about, in it is a show. Even what they do in Japan is a show. Just because you can't understand them doesn't mean they're not good promo guys. Doesn't mean that they put a lot of effort into appearance. Doesn't mean they just also combine it with great professional wrestling. And it, it Hogan was as good as anyone. I did. I saw a psychologist for many years, and she said something profound to me. She said, your love of professional wrestling makes sense because you were a kid that was big, looking for acceptance, and in the world of professional wrestling, being big was acceptable, and that really struck me. And I've never had the physique of Hulk Hogan, but being a fat kid in school, I was tall and I was fat, you know, the it would have been acceptable to be that in professional wrestling. Big people wrestling larger than life. That they were my people. They are my people. Bobby the Brain Heenan and later Jerry Lawler, but more Bobby for me, Bobby and Gorilla and Jesse and Gorilla. I love Jesse Ventura with all my heart. Like, these guys were so witty and funny, and I listened to their commentary nonstop. That's where I got my wit from. Like, it's where my bite, but thinking on my feet. I always thought they were hilarious, and they were larger than life to me. It was it was magical, and Hulk Hogan was a big part of that magic. The other side of Hulk Hogan is sad. Not that he was involved in a sex tape scandal. I don't care about that. But he was so openly and proudly racist, and didn't just stop at one comment, had multiple comments. It sucked because I could handle Hogan being a phony, but I know you can see it, so many black people loved Hulkamania. Hulkamania spoke to you no matter what race or what color you were. And for the man behind it to make it clear that black people weren't welcome in his life, Terry Bollea, that's sucks. It sucks for the fans and the wrestlers that looked up to Hulk Hogan. Some of them have been able to go, I'm not going to let Terry Bollea take that away from me, and Hulk Hogan's why I wanted to become a wrestler. Some of them go, Hulk Hogan, opened a lot of doors for me, and some of them go, what he did was unforgivable. And they're all correct. And it's an individual decision and how you want to handle this. Somebody that I have great affection for and a lot of time for, who currently is a big star in the WWE, a little while back made his feelings very clear to me on Hulk Hogan with some customization on something that he did. And I'm not going to name him and I'm not going to get into it, but I can understand why he felt that way. And I was sort of like, yeah, right on, fuck Terry Bollea. Um, and I still say that. Terry Bollea, man, you didn't have to be that. And you chose to be that. And for that, your legacy is tarnished by people. You know, when you stood there publicly supporting this monster that's now president of the United States, you, you did that because you wanted open bigotry. You wanted it to be okay and you wanted to be absolved and forgiven, right? Instead, maybe you could have just gone, reflected, and tried changing your worldview, you know, because it's always complicated, isn't it? Like, because Terry Bollea also did tons of charity work and stuff with kids in the Special Olympics and stuff that he didn't ram down people's throats. You know, the world's a complicated place. Humans are complicated. And Terry Bollea, in my worldview, not a great person. But the character he portrayed and what he put into that character is iconic. So it's complicated. While I was in America, I was at the airport and I was leaving. And this was on the front page of a newspaper, the New York Post, for those watching on YouTube. Hulk Hogan was, this is how iconic he was. Front page news. Don't get it twisted. Hulk Hogan was the biggest professional wrestler of all time. Have I gotten a kick out of hitting on Hulk Hogan many times? Yes. Did I laugh at Austin and Austin and Bret Hart giving him shit? Yes. You know, Hogan deserves everything he gets, from accolades to being torn down. But he was an important part of me being a kid. And while I never was a number one Hulkamaniac, every wrestling fan of the 80s was sucked in by Hulkamania running wild. And if you say that you weren't, you either lived in the South and only watched Crockett, or you're a liar, because he was larger than life and will forever be larger than life. I will forever watch Hulk Hogan matches. There will be Hogan merch that I'll get, and you'll go, why do you get Hogan merch? It's like, because it's a representation of my youth, of who I was. I will always wear an NWO shirt. I thought NWO Hollywood was cooler than the Wolfpack because I hated the K Dog and his Viva La Raza, all that, not from a race standpoint. Just rap is crap. You know, that was my attitude in the 90s. You know, I was still into rock music and guitars and hadn't broadened my palate and tastes publicly. You know, but I think, you know, I thought the Wolfpack was lame with their two sweets and stuff, but I love it all now. But you know, I was NWO Hollywood when the factions broke off. And you know, because I always have to be the difficult one. It's what I do. But I now go back and reflect on it and look at it, and I love it all. And I won't, I personally am choosing not to have it taken from me. You know, and I was sad that Hulk Hogan passed away because he meant a lot to a lot of people. And I don't think I'm sitting here as somebody with the ability to publicly speak if Hulkamania isn't born. And how do you not talk about that? How do you not acknowledge that? You know, Roman Reigns says, acknowledge me. How do you not acknowledge that? I am not here to tell you you're wrong if you refuse to celebrate any part of Hulk Hogan. That is your right and that is your decision. I don't even think you're wrong. But I don't think that you should necessarily tear down others that are mourning him and celebrating him because emotional connection to youth is something that's really important. And I think to rip that away from people can be traumatic. And you can have an opinion. We've all got opinions. All we hear is opinions. But randomly tearing into somebody because they're mourning the loss of Hulk Hogan, I'm asking you not to. Now, you want to make Hulk Hogan jokes to me and stuff, I'll have a chuckle. But, you know, I I I don't wipe him from history like a Benoit. It's different things. Now, that's not saying I endorse his racism. Because I don't. You know, politically, I couldn't be more opposed. But if I'm going to stop watching professional wrestling because I'm politically opposed to the performers of my childhood and stuff, I'm in big trouble because most of those motherfuckers are Republicans, right? They're conservatives. Um, you know, I'm very pro union, and famously, Hulk Hogan ratted out Jesse Ventura and stopped a union in professional wrestling, and that could have saved lives. You know, Terry Bollea is a flawed person, but Hulk Hogan is the biggest name of professional wrestling ever created, and he is intertwined with something that has created me, and I can't separate it. And it's the same for the Ultimate Warrior. I was really sad when Jim Hellwig passed away. You know, sad for his daughters, um, and that, you know. But do I think Jim Hellwig was a great person? No. Do I love the feelings of childhood and everything that seeing The Ultimate Warrior can bring up for me? Yes. Will I always watch The Ultimate Challenge from WrestleMania 6 and love it? Yes. Will I sometimes watch their rematch at Halloween Havoc 98 and the utter confusion of The Ultimate Warrior just rolling around on the mat and Tony Schiavone calling it a rolling block? Yes. Yeah, you know, it's humans are flawed. Our memories and nostalgia is even flawed. But I don't think in this instance we have the right to tear down people for feeling a sense of loss because somebody meant so much to them. And a lot of people were Hulkamaniacs. A lot of people were, you know, that was their first love with professional wrestling. Hogan wasn't my first love, but he's the reason that I discovered my first love. And you know, I've got Hulk Hogan action figures, Hulk Hogan merchandise. I watched Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling. There's no NWO without Hulk Hogan. Like, how can I claim I'm not a Hulk Hogan fan? Yeah, it sucks, Terry Bollea, but we found out who he really was. It does, it sucks. Um, but a lot of my heroes I don't think I'd like in real life, but I don't have to let the characters they portray be lost to me because they're just portraying characters. Yeah. Um, yeah. I'd like to hear your opinions. You know, what are some of your fond memories of Hulk Hogan? You know, do you agree with me? Do you think I'm crazy? I don't know. It's complicated. But I wanted to talk about it. Um, you know, some of you will watch this and be disappointed that I took this stand, but I wasn't black and white with it. You know, I am black and white with Terry Bollea's views on the world. I just think that the love of professional wrestling and the character Hulk Hogan, I get people mourning the loss of that, and unfortunately, Terry Bollea is the person that played that. You know, you know, I enjoy Demolition Man and Rocky 3. Pretty sure I wouldn't like how Sylvester Stallone voted. Arnold Schwarzenegger was a Republican governor at one point. You know, like it's you know it's great when your heroes live up to expectations in the real world. It makes your choice even more valid. But I think we've got to not let, within reason, we've got to not let people take away that. But if you choose not to give that person the time of day because of things they said, and Hogan said a lot of terrible things, and he was a scab, and stop. If you can't forgive that, I completely understand, right? Um, Hulk Hogan, the character of the '80s, would understand you not forgiving. And it's a shame, but Terry Bollea couldn't extend that kindness in the real world for the most part. Shame Jim Hellwig couldn't. Um, you know, but it is what it is. It's a reality of, you know, your heroes living long enough to see themselves become the villains because they can't live. It's hard to live up to the lofty expectation of the heroes they portray, be it Hollywood, music, professional wrestling, television, sport, you know, many things. Sport's probably less of a black and white issue because they're not really playing a character, are they? Um, but professional wrestling's not a sport. It's a sport of kings, but it's entertainment. You know, it's scripted combat. Um, yeah, so let me know what you think. Thank you for your time. Thank you to The Shine for the awesome music. Follow Refreshing Thoughts. I appreciate your support. Geek Dudes and Hey, it's, the podcast is coming back. I'm Chris Fresh. You can support me for $5 Australian a month and support Geek Dudes and Hey, it's a podcast. But most importantly, click like, subscribe, share. That's the best way to get this out there. Yeah, I'd love to hear your Hogan memories, your Hogan thoughts. If you disagree with me, it's your right to say that too. I don't even know that you're wrong. Thank you for checking this out, and I'll speak to you in a little while.